10 of my greatest black lightweights of all times must include the legendary Old Master, Joe Gans. You cannot have a conversation about lightweight champions or black fighters in general without the name Joe Gans. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. And I would like to discuss with you Joe Gans' career, life and times, as we go through the 10 greatest black lightweights of all times, in my opinion. Born November 25th, 1874, Baltimore, Maryland. A young man would be blessed in a pugilism, the game of boxing. He would die August 10th, 1910 in Baltimore, Maryland. He was 35 years of age at the time of his death. He stood 5'6.5" weighed 131 to 138 pounds. Now, as champion, he would have 15 title defenses, facing 13 fighters. He was managed by Al Herford, had well over 170 bouts, close to 200. He had 12 losses, over 100 astonishing knockouts. 10 years after the Civil War, between 1891 and 1909, Joe Gans would bless the boxing circles. You see, May 12, 1902, he would defeat Frank Earn in Fort Earn, knocking him out in one round. And he would become the first black lightweight champion of all times. Matter of fact, he was the first black American champion in any weight division in boxing history. Knocking his man out 1 minute and 30 seconds reminds me of Mike Tyson, 1988, putting away Michael the Jinx Spinks in 90 seconds. Now, Joe Gans would take on Kentucky Rosebud, Young Griffo, William Spike Sullivan, Bobby Dobbs, Herman Miller, Martin Judge, George Elbow McFadden, Willie Fitzgerald, Jack Blackburn, Sam Langford, Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott, just to name a few. In his career, he would have to deal with not only segregation or discrimination or prejudice, but he would have to deal with taking orders that he would otherwise not bless himself. In 1894, Joe Gans would take on Arthur Coates in Baltimore, knocking him out in 22 rounds. He would face George Evans and Dave Armstrong, Jack Daly and Dave Horn, John Ball, and Johnny Van Heest. He would be undefeated up until this point. In 1895, February 6th to be exact, he would take on Fred Swingert in Baltimore, Maryland. He would defeat him in 10 rounds, and he would remain undefeated for several fights that year, taking on fighters such as Sol English and Howard Wilson. Kentucky Rosebud, he fought him April 2nd and April 25th. He would defeat him in 10 rounds and then again 7 rounds, totaling 17 rounds that year. He would also take on Young Griffo, but he would fight a man by the name of George Sidney, November 28th, 1895. And he would stop him in 7 rounds. Why was that significant? Because George Siddons, he would face several times in the future, and George Siddons would become a future colored featherweight champion. George was a pretty decent fighter, but Joe Gans would defeat him. In 1897, he had about 5 fights that year, losing one to Bobby Dobbs. Now, Bobby Dobbs would be a colored lightweight champion. Phenomenal fighter he was. They fought September 27th, 1897, Brooklyn, New York. Joe Gans would lose 20 rounds to the very popular and very skillful Bobby Dobbs. But in 1898, he would have several fights with men such as Frank Gillard, Young Starlight, Steve Crosby, Billy Ernst, and Tom Jackson. He would take on Kid McFarlane, November 4th, 1898. Now, Kid McFarlane was not discussed as much as he could be, but he was a very good lightweight. And don't let nobody kid you. The majority of Joe Gans's early opponents understood how to use their hands. Joe Gans would take on Sam Bolin and Joe Grimm, Jimmy Britt, Mike Twin Sullivan, Willie Lewis, and Oscar Battling Nelson. September 30th, 1904, Joe Gans challenged to the World Welterweight Championship title against his good friend, the Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott. He fought him to a 20-round draw in San Francisco, California. Walcott would have battles of his own with fighters such as the Dixie Kid, Aaron Brown, Tommy West, George Kid Lavin, Sam Langford, and Joe Chowinski. Speaking of George Kid Lavin, he was a champion. Very smart in that ring. And to have George Kid Lavin on your resume, it's quite an accomplishment. George Kid Lavin would take on Mysterious Billy Smith, Joe Gans, Joe Walcott, Johnny Griffin, Tommy Ryan. Quite an accomplishment. Now, Joe Gans would take on George Siddons, who won the vacant lightweight championship crown. September 3rd, 1906, Joe Gans would defeat Oscar Battling Nelson. "42 rounds, Goldfield, Nevada, would be for the World Lightweight Championship crown. He would cut up Oscar Bonavena mouth to ribbons. Meanwhile, Oscar Bonavena would wail away with illegal low blows, so bad that the referee would jump in and stop the contest. Now, Joe Gans had weighed 133 pounds. He would be offered $11,000 for the contest, with stipulations. He was told, if you lose this fight, you will die. You will be executed at gunpoint. You cannot lose this fight no matter what happens, because of the wagers that were placed in his behalf. After battling Nelson, he weighed about 132, 133 pounds himself. He was known for having the scissor hook. The scissor hook was a body punch with an open glove so that the thumb would be placed in the rib cage. He was paid $20,000 and he was ordered to win at all costs. Gans' life was threatened to the point where his family life was at stake. Gans would be seen helping battling Nelson up several times when he was dropped with a left hook and didn't follow up as he normally would. Gans twice faced Mike Twin Sullivan, January 17th and March 17th. He would return to Baltimore. And about 3 weeks before his death, home was his mother. He wanted to see the Jack Johnson and the Boilermaker Jim Jeffries bout. Unable to do so, he would never find out that Jim Jeffries was knocked out after being humiliated for 15 rounds by his good friend, the Galveston Giant, Jack Johnson. On January 6, 1902, Gans defeated the former world welterweight champion, Canadian-born Eddie Connolly. Connolly had lost in 5 rounds. A bout took place in Washington Sporting Club in Philadelphia. On September 15, 1905, for 15 rounds, in a prearranged draw, with the welterweight champion claimant, Mike Twin Sullivan. Most people reporting the fight believe that Sullivan deserved the decision. Well, Mike Twin Sullivan was given an opportunity to face the Michigan assassin Stanley Ketchel for the vacant middleweight championship crown. He would come up short. Stanley Ketchel would die the same year as Joe Gans, 1910. When you look at Joe Gans' career, the things that he had to deal with, it is remarkable. 1900, March 23rd to be exact, 26-year-old Joe Gans would throw a fight with Frank Earn, 12 rounds, by allowing himself to be knocked out in New York, like Gans wanted the bout to be stopped, according to onlookers. He would suffer a cut eye, and he would use that excuse for quitting in the ring, and have to be called a yellow streak. He made sure that didn't happen again. July 15th, 1901, he faced Harry Berger, Jack Donahue, and Kid Thomas, 3 bouts in one day. May 12th, 1902, KO'd Buddy King, 5 rounds, and offered to challenge a heckler to come into the square circle and heckle to his face. And after the heckler continued with the disrespect of racial name calling. Joe Gans' good buddy, world welterweight champion, the Baltimore Demon, Joe Walcott, took off his blazer and offered to challenge that heckler as well. And so did the first black heavyweight champion, Galveston Giant, Jack Johnson. This fight took place July 4th, 1903. Now Frank Earn will be defeated in 100 seconds in one round. Now who was Frank Earn? He was born January 8, 1875 in Switzerland. He knocked out Jack Skelly. Two separate occasions, 7th round and the 9th round. Now who was Jack Skelly? Jack Skelly was an amateur star, and he would challenge George Dixon, September 6, 1892, the Carnival of Champions. He'd be stopped in 8 rounds, and because of that knockout, mixed race fights would be banned in the South for over 60 years. In that bout, George Dixon would be hit with billy clubs and sticks anytime he came against the ropes. He was forced to fight in the center of the ring. His sweat was not welcomed. The fly in the audiences of the white establishment. Frank Earn would also take on George Dixon, have a draw and a loss with him. Solly Smith, Young Griffo, Dale Hawkins, and George Elbow McFadden. July 3rd, 1899. He would win in 20 rounds. George Kit Lavin, Buffalo, New York, March 23rd, 1900. Killed Joe Gans in 12 rounds. Gans decided no longer to continue. December 13th, killed by Timmy McGovern, 2nd round in New York. September 23rd, 1901, killed by Ruth Burns and Fort Ernst in 9. May 12th, 1902, killed by Joe Gans, 1st round, lost the World Lightweight Championship crown. Frank Earn was a good fighter, but he was no match for Joe Gans. Neither was Battling Nelson. Neither was Jimmy Britt. Neither was any of those fighters. Had Joe Gans be given a fair opportunity, I believe he would have won 99% of his fights. Most of them by knockouts. That's how good of a fighter Joe Gans was. Joe Gans would take a dive with Battling Nelson, Goldfield, Nevada, 42 rounds. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Thanks for watching. My #1 greatest lightweight champion of all times. And 1 of 10 greatest black lightweights in boxing history, Joe Gans.